Thank you for listening to our Mystery Audiobook channel. Please like, comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and don't forget to hit the bell notification icon. And now, for our feature presentation, Murder Under the Olive Tree. Chapter 1. A Letter Most Curious. It was on a grey and blustery Tuesday morning in March, the sort of morning that seemed determined to remind England of its chill temperament, that Detective Jane Parsons first read the letter that would take her far from the soot-streaked streets of London and into the ancient heart of Greece. She had been seated tidy little Bloomsbury office, a second-floor room above a tailor's shop, sipping a tepid cup of tea and reading the morning's paper. A case of a missing cat had just been resolved, without drama, and Jane had begun to wonder if her talents might find themselves wasted in such domestic trivialities forevermore. Then the post arrived. It was the letter's paper that first caught her eye, heavy cream-coloured vellum with a faint scent of lavender. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, slightly slanted. Daphne Whitcomb. Jane's brows lifted. She hadn't heard from Daphne in nearly a decade, not since their university days. Daphne had always been brilliant, intense, and slightly peculiar. While Jane had turned her keen mind toward private investigations, Daphne had pursued ancient languages and archaeology, devoting herself to dusty scrolls and forgotten tombs. With growing interest, Jane broke the seal. "My dear Jane, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing from Athens, where I've been overseeing the final stages of an excavation funded by Lord Cyril Marchmont. You may remember him as a benefactor to Cambridge's Antiquities Department. We are stationed at his villa, Deli House, just beyond the city limits. The project has been fruitful, to say the least. But I must confess, it is not the archaeological yield that prompts this letter. I find myself troubled, deeply so, though I dare not commit the full nature of my concerns to paper. Let us simply say there are undercurrents here I do not fully understand, and which I suspect may become dangerous. If you are not otherwise engaged, I would entreat you to join me in Greece for a fortnight, ostensibly as a guest, but in truth, I need someone I can trust, someone with your mind. I have arranged passage aboard the Egan, departing Dover on the 14th. All expenses are handled. I pray you will come. There is more at stake than I can say. Warmly, Daphne." Jane read the letter twice, her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. There had been something strange in the phrasing, "I suspect may become dangerous," and in the way Daphne had danced around the details. This was no idle academic's nervous fancy. Jane had spent enough years reading people to know when someone was genuinely afraid. She stood and moved to the window. Outside, London moved with its usual indifferent pace. Trams rattled, boots splashed through puddles, and the distant shriek of a newsboy cut through the air. Greece. She hadn't travelled in a few years, and certainly not since her last major case. The idea of leaving England for warm Aegean shores and sun-drenched ruins might have appealed more, were it not for the unspoken menace curling through Daphne's words. Was it merely paranoia, or had Daphne truly stumbled upon something dangerous in the ruins? Jane walked to her cabinet, drew out her leather travel case and began to pack. Her passport, notebook, 2 discreetly concealed weapons, and a sturdy pair of boots. She included a linen summer dress or 2, though she doubted she'd have much occasion to wear them. By dusk, she had secured her affairs, informed her solicitor of her temporary leave, and sent a telegram to the Athens address Daphne had included. "Joining you aboard the Egan. Will arrive as requested. Jane Parsons." And with that, the wheels of fate were set in motion. Chapter 2. The Guests of Delphi House. The journey to Greece was, in Jane's words, both smooth and disconcertingly pleasant. The Aegon was an elegant steamer with clean cabins, attentive staff, and a view of the Aegean Sea that turned increasingly sapphire as the English fog gave way to Mediterranean sun. She spent her evenings reading in the lounge and her mornings pacing the deck, observing fellow passengers with a detective's unbreakable habit, watching how people moved, who they avoided, and what they tried to hide. By the time she disembarked at the port of Piraeus, Jane had catalogued 2 adulterous couples, 1 smuggler masquerading as a violinist, and at least 3 forged passports. At the edge of the port, a handsome, harried-looking Greek man held up a card bearing her name. He introduced himself in broken English as Stavros, a driver for Delphi House. Within moments, her luggage was loaded onto a motor car, and they began winding through the golden afternoon light of Athens. The city was a tapestry of contrasts: crumbling antiquity and fresh construction, sun-bleached ruins and new cafes bustling with politics and espresso. The scent of roasting olives and honeyed figs drifted through the air. But it was when they left the city and began climbing into the hills that Jane felt the first true tug of unease. Delphi House came into view just before sunset. It was a whitewashed villa built into the slope of a rocky hill, with grand marble columns at its entrance, and a view that stretched far beyond the olive groves to the Indigo Sea. Daphne met her at the entrance, pale and thin, her once carefree manner replaced by a tense elegance. "Jane," she breathed, gripping both of her hands. "You came." "I said I would," Jane replied gently, eyeing her old friend. "You look tired." "There's been more tension than I anticipated." Daphne hesitated, then added in a whisper, "You'll understand soon enough." Inside, the house was cool and fragrant with lemon and stone. A high-ceilinged drawing room opened onto a shaded veranda where a gathering had already begun. A silver tray held glasses of ouzo and dates stuffed with almonds. Daphne, ever the hostess despite her tremulous nerves, cleared her throat and introduced Jane to the others. "Everyone, this is Jane Parsons, a dear friend from Cambridge. She'll be staying with us for a fortnight. Jane, allow me to present our eclectic company." Jane inclined her head, taking each person in with quiet scrutiny. First was Lord Cyril Marchmont, the villa's owner. Tall, lean, and in his late 60s, he wore a white linen suit and walked with a cane topped by a carved owl's head. His eyes, sharp and amused, studied Jane with interest. "A private investigator, are you?" he said with a smile. "Marvellous. I do admire a woman who turns her mind to something useful." Jane smiled politely. "That's kind of you, my lord." Next was Theo Marchmont, Cyril's nephew. Perhaps 35, he was good-looking in the careless way of English aristocracy, flaxen-haired, sunburnt, and already a little drunk. "Daphne didn't tell us she'd invited a detective," he said, chuckling. "What's next, an exorcist?" "Only if requested," Jane replied, making Theo snort. In the corner stood Dr. Eleni Pappas, the Greek historian overseeing the excavation's academic analysis. Tall, dark-haired, and unsmiling, Eleni acknowledged Jane with the faintest nod. "I hope you enjoy your stay," she said coolly, "though I fail to see why a British detective is needed here." Jane filed that tone away, defensive, possibly resentful. And finally, there was Mr. Roland Blythe, all smiles and charm, in an unseasonably cravat. He was introduced as an advisory consultant, but Jane knew the type, a dealer in antiquities, walking the line between patronage and plunder. "A pleasure," Roland said, kissing her hand. "Any friend of Daphne's is a curiosity I must understand." "You'll find I'm not very curious," Jane replied, "except where things go missing." A flicker of something passed through Roland's eyes. Then he grinned. "Then you'll find Greece most stimulating." That evening, dinner was served in the tiled courtyard beneath a canopy of vines. The conversation shifted from light banter to archaeology, the recent discovery of a marble altar, and rumours of a golden statuette buried deep within the earth. Lord Cyril recounted the expedition's setbacks with theatrical flair, while Theo interrupted with poor jokes and repeated trips to the wine decanter. Jane watched Daphne, who barely touched her food. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. Her eyes darted often to Lord Cyril and to Eleni. After dessert, Jane finally found a moment alone with her in the small library, lined with Greek texts and maps. "Now," Jane said, her voice low, "what's really going on, Daphne?" Daphne hesitated. Then she went to the window, staring out into the dark hills. "I think someone's hiding something," she said at last. "Not about the artifacts, though there is something peculiar about the golden statuette. It's more than that. There's tension, secrets, and I've found notes, private papers, written in haste and half-burned in the fireplace." Jane stepped closer. "Whose papers?" "I don't know. I only caught fragments. Something about money and betrayal." Daphne looked at her, her voice shaking. "Someone is pretending to be something they're not." Before Jane could press further, a crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a raised voice. Theo shouting about someone stealing his whiskey. Daphne exhaled shakily. "You see?" Jane nodded. "Yes, I see." Outside, the wind rose through the olive trees like a whispering breath, and within the walls of Delphi House, suspicion had already begun to bloom. Chapter 3. Whispers at Midnight. Sleep did not come easily to Jane that night. She lay in her guest chamber, a white-walled room with exposed beams and the faint scent of lemon oil in the linens. Outside, the cicadas sang their hypnotic song. Inside, something felt off. Daphne's unease clung to her memory like mist. And then there was that cryptic remark. Someone is pretending to be something they're not. Jane slipped from bed around midnight, wrapped herself in a light robe, and opened the shuttered window. The Aegean Sea glimmered in the moonlight beyond the olive groves. The entire estate looked drenched in silver, the trees casting long shadows like outstretched fingers. She was about to return to bed when movement caught her eye, subtle but deliberate. Down the slope, toward the edge of the excavation site, a figure moved between the olive trees. Slow, cautious, someone trying not to be seen. They carried something small in their hands, though the moonlight made it impossible to tell what. Jane didn't hesitate. She slipped into her walking shoes, pulled her coat over her nightdress, and crept from her room. The hallway was dark, lined with Greek vases and a large oil painting of Delphi itself. Somewhere in the villa, a door creaked and distant footsteps echoed across the tile. She paused, listening. Nothing followed. Downstairs, the front door groaned softly as she opened it. She descended the path in silence, each step slow and deliberate. The olive trees rustled around her like sentinels. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Jane crouched behind a stone wall near the edge of the dig site. The figure stood just beyond the main trench, a square depression in the earth with crude steps leading downward. They seemed to be examining something, their head bent, a lamp in hand. Jane could make out a coat, loosely fitted, male possibly, taller than Daphne, thinner than Lord Cyril. Perhaps Theo? The person straightened abruptly and turned, scanning the darkness. Jane held her breath. For a moment she feared she had been seen, but the figure turned again, slipping into the shadows with a speed that suggested they knew the site well. Jane waited several minutes before making her move. She approached the trench. No tools had been left behind, no obvious footprints in the dust, but the air felt disturbed, as if someone had come here to check something, to reassure themselves, or to hide something. Back in her room, Jane jotted notes into her small black book. Unidentified figure, approximately 6 feet tall, moved with confidence, familiar with terrain, object in hand, possibly scroll or package. Why here? Why now? She was still writing when a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Daphne, wrapped in a shawl, her hair down and her face pale. "I couldn't sleep," Daphne whispered. "I thought I heard footsteps." "You did," Jane said. "Someone was at the dig site." Daphne paled further. "You saw them." "Not enough to identify, but they knew where they were going." Daphne sat on the edge of the bed. "I've had the feeling for days now that I'm being watched, that someone doesn't want me to find something." Jane sat beside her. "Then we need to ask ourselves, what might you be close to discovering?" Daphne hesitated, then reached into her shawl and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "I haven't told Lord Cyril," she said, "or anyone." Inside the cloth was a fragment of carved gold, about the size of Jane's palm. It was delicate, its edges ornate with what looked like wings or feathers, and the glint of something ancient gleamed in the firelight. "The statuette," Jane breathed. "No," Daphne said, "a part of it. We found it 2 days ago, but I didn't log it in the catalogue. I had a feeling, I don't know, that it wasn't safe to declare it yet. There's something strange about it, Jane. The metal's composition, the style, it doesn't quite match the supposed era." "Could it be a forgery?" Daphne blinked. "If it is, then someone planted it deliberately, which raises an even darker question. Why?" Jane wrapped the piece again and returned it to her friend. "You must hide this somewhere safer, somewhere only you know." Daphne nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "I will. But Jane, I'm frightened." Jane placed a hand on her arm. "And you were right to call me." As dawn broke, the villa awoke to the scent of brewing coffee and freshly baked bread, the sun painting the sea in hues of gold and peach. At breakfast, the atmosphere was tight. Lord Cyril spoke animatedly about a recent column in the Times praising British expeditions abroad. Theo nursed a headache, half listening while sipping strong coffee. Eleni remained distant, her fork barely touching the fruit on her plate. Roland, ever suave, asked Jane if she'd enjoyed the stillness of Grecian nights. Jane met his gaze. "Oh, very much. Stillness can be quite revealing." Roland tilted his head, the corner of his mouth twitching. As they finished, Lord Cyril clapped his hands. "We begin digging again today. Something tells me we're on the cusp of a major find." "Yes," Jane murmured to herself, watching each face in turn. "Something tells me you might be right." But what they were on the cusp of, she suspected, was not treasure. Chapter 4. Death Under the Olive Tree. The scent of dust and thyme lingered in the air as Jane walked the grounds of Delphi House with deliberate slowness, observing more than sightseeing. Breakfast had been a quieter affair than the previous day. Daphne was nowhere to be seen. Lord Cyril brushed off her absence as probably head-deep in scrolls, while Theo chuckled and suggested she was sleeping off one too many glasses of Mavra Daphne. Eleni had barely spoken, her eyes rimmed with shadows. Roland was charming as ever, but something about his easy demeanour had become too smooth, too studied. Jane knew the look of a man hiding nervous energy behind charm. After breakfast, Lord Cyril led the small party down to the excavation site. The trench had deepened over the week, revealing broken walls of what might have once been a small temple or shrine. An altar stone, partially uncovered, lay at the northern edge, decorated with fading symbols. 2 Greek workers stood beside the trench, their tools idle, awaiting instruction. Jane noticed the golden glint in the dust, the same strange metal as the fragment Daphne had shown her. Another piece, perhaps. Daphne was still absent. Jane's unease sharpened. "I think I'll stretch my legs a little farther," she said to Lord Cyril. "The air's rather stifling this morning." "Certainly," he said with a wave of his cane, But do take care, the cliffs drop quite sharply beyond the grove." Jane nodded and slipped away from the dig site, her steps leading her past the well, through a winding row of olive trees, and toward the small outcrop where she and Daphne had shared tea their first day. A battered wooden bench overlooked the sea there, and Daphne had often mentioned retreating to it when the politics of the house became too loud. It wasn't long before Jane saw the edge of a pale shawl tangled in the branches. Her pace quickened. "Daphne?" No reply. She stepped around the twisted olive tree, heart already sinking, and froze. There, lying beneath the tree's crooked limbs, was Daphne Whitcomb. Her back was half propped against the gnarled trunk, her limbs arranged in a way that seemed almost peaceful, except for the fixed stare in her wide, vacant eyes. Her mouth was slightly open. A faint foam clung to her lips. The shawl was bunched under her shoulder. The fragment of gold was nowhere to be seen. Jane crouched at once, checking the body. Daphne had likely died during the night or in the earliest dawn. And then the scent hit her. Almonds, bitter, barely perceptible. Jane's mouth pressed into a grim line. Poison. An hour later, the villa was in chaos. The local police arrived, a Captain Lucas and 2 assistants, summoned by Stavros with trembling hands. Lord Cyril blustered, waving his cane and demanding privacy. Eleni turned pale and silent. Theo vomited into a nearby shrub. Roland lit cigarette after cigarette with shaking hands. Jane stood by as the coroner examined the body. "She has been dead perhaps 6 or 7 hours," he said in halting English. "Poisoning, yes. I suspect cyanide." Captain Lucas turned to Jane. "You are an investigator?" "I am." "Then you will assist us?" "If you'll allow me, Miss Whitcomb was a close friend." The captain nodded once. "Then help me understand this house." Jane stepped away with him and spoke quietly. "I believe Miss Whitcomb was in possession of something she did not declare. An artifact. She was afraid. She confided in me only 2 nights ago that she suspected someone in the villa was not who they appeared to be. Someone, I believe, who was willing to kill to keep a secret." Lucas frowned. "You believe the motive is archaeological?" "I believe the motive is buried deeper than that," she replied. The interrogation of the villa's guests began that afternoon. Theo Marchmont was the first to speak. Dishevelled and slightly sunburnt, he was clearly shaken, but not, Jane noticed, grief-stricken. "I didn't even like Daphne," he muttered. "She was always so righteous, always judging, thought she knew better than everyone." "Did you quarrel recently?" Jane asked. "We had words. She accused me of drinking too much, of being careless around the dig site. So what?" "What were you doing last night around midnight?" Theo blinked. "Drinking? In the garden? Alone?" "No one saw you?" "No one awake that I know of." A flimsy alibi. Dr. Eleni Pappas sat stiffly in a carved chair, hands folded in her lap. "I did not kill her," she said immediately. "I disagreed with her, yes. She wanted to keep findings quiet until we had more verification. I believed we owed it to history to declare them. But I would never—" "Did you know she possessed a golden fragment?" Jane asked. Eleni froze. "No." "You're lying!" Her nostrils flared. "If I had known, I would have insisted she report it. But I did not." Her tone was sharp, wounded, defensive again. Roland Blythe leaned back against the balustrade of the veranda, his cravat loosened, a glass of brandy in hand. "It's a terrible thing," he said. "Poor girl, she didn't have the stomach for intrigue." "You knew she had the golden artifact?" "Oh, I suspected. She'd grown secretive. I make it a habit to notice when people guard objects." "You deal in antiquities." "I provide a service," he said smoothly. "But I draw the line at murder, Miss Parsons." "Do you?" His grin faltered for the first time. By dusk, the The sun had begun to sink into the sea like a bleeding coin, and a heaviness had settled over the villa. Jane returned to the olive tree once more, alone, retracing every step. At the base of the tree, a small depression in the earth caught her eye. Kneeling, she brushed away the soil, revealing a faint print of a shoe, likely male. A few specks of gold leaf clung to the bark. The statuette had been there, and had been taken. From somewhere behind her came the low hoot of an owl. Jane straightened, heart beating fast. The murderer was here, among them, watching, waiting. Chapter 5. Shadows from the Past. The death of Daphne Whitcomb cast a long, uneasy shadow over Delphi House. The villa, once filled with the rustle of silk curtains and polite conversation, now echoed with silence and suspicion. Meals were taken in stiffness, conversations shortened, glances sharpened. Jane sat alone in the study, Daphne's journal open before her. Captain Lucas had allowed her to examine the deceased's possessions, and the journal, dog-eared and crammed with notes, was perhaps the most revealing item. Most of the pages detailed excavation schedules, weather notes, and sketches of uncovered fragments. But near the end, the handwriting grew hurried, increasingly erratic, whole sentences abandoned halfway through. March 12th. Uncovered a fragment by trench wall. Odd weight, unusual detailing, gold alloy, doesn't match earlier period, possibly fabricated. March 13th. Argued with Theo. Roland, growing suspicious, thinks I found something valuable. I overheard him speaking with someone. His Greek is poor, but I understood shipment and buyer. March 14th. The fragment feels wrong in my hand. Too clean. It isn't ancient. It's a lie, buried like truth. Why? March 15th. Someone searched my room, left the drawer ajar, nothing taken, but I know. Someone knows I'm watching. I should speak to Jane. She'll understand. March 16th. A visitor from the past? No, it can't be. But the letters. The page ended there, torn at the edge. Jane closed the book slowly. A visitor from the past, she murmured aloud. What letters? Whose past? A knock at the study door interrupted her thoughts. It was Stavros, the driver. He shuffled in, cap in hand. Miss Parsons, he said, lowering his voice, I did not want to speak in front of the others, but I must tell you something. Jane gestured for him to sit. 2 nights ago, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I saw Mr. Roland leave the house. It was past midnight. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth. I did not think much of it. But now, with Miss Whitcomb. You're sure it was Roland? Yes, miss. I saw the silver on his cane. He uses it when he climbs the steps. Jane nodded slowly. Thank you, Stavros. You've done the right thing. But suspicion alone was never enough. Jane needed proof. Later that afternoon, Jane approached Roland Blythe as he stood on the terrace, watching the sea with an air of practised serenity. Taking in the view, Mr. Blythe, she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Trying to clear the cobwebs, Miss Parsons. A death tends to settle in the lungs, doesn't it? Or in the conscience, she replied coolly. His brow twitched. Are you suggesting something? I'm suggesting, she said, taking a step closer, that you're not just here as an advisor. You're here because you believed something valuable was going to be found, something you could sell. Roland exhaled smoke from a thin cigarillo. You mistake me. I'm a businessman, yes, but I deal only in legitimate acquisitions. And late-night visits to the dig site? Jane asked. He stiffened ever so slightly. She pressed further. What did you wrap in cloth and carry out 2 nights ago? Provisions, he said too quickly. Wine. I sometimes take it to the Grove. Odd place for a midnight picnic? He flicked the cigarillo away. Do you have any real evidence, Miss Parsons? "Not yet," she replied, "but I'm very good at finding it." That evening, a new discovery shifted the winds. Captain Lucas summoned Jane urgently. One of the villa's workers, a boy no older than 16, had found a burnt scrap of paper behind the old well house, wedged between two stones. Miraculously, the fire hadn't claimed it entirely. Jane examined it under the lamp's glow. Scrawled handwriting. A single phrase remained legible. "Will pay £10,000 for an authentic replica. Must appear ancient. Use Delian gold alloy. A replica? Gold? Payment? A Hamisitvani." So Daphne had been right. Someone had planted a forged artifact in the trench. But why? And more importantly, who would gain from such a deception? Jane made a list in her mind. Lord Cyril Marchmont. Motive: prestige. His reputation as a patron of archaeology was waning. A major discovery could revive it and secure further funding. Opportunity: as the villa's owner, he had access to every part of the estate. Means: ample wealth and influence. Yet Lord Cyril was a proud man. Would he truly risk his entire legacy on a forgery? Theo Marchmont. Motive: debt. Jane had quietly checked his background. Gambling debts, several creditors. Opportunity: as Cyril's nephew, he moved freely through the villa. Means: desperation often makes a man capable of foolish crimes. But of murder? Dr. Eleni Pappas. Motive: nationalist pride. Jane suspected Eleni resented the British presence at the dig. If a forgery were exposed, the scandal could shame Cyril and halt future British expeditions. Opportunity: she supervised the trench cataloguing. Means: her scholarly knowledge made her perfectly suited to design a convincing fake. Roland Blythe. Motive: profit. A forged statuette, passed off as real, could fetch a fortune. Opportunity: he was already under suspicion. Means: connections with underground buyers and knowledge of materials. And yet, all four still walked the halls of Delphi House, pretending civility, hiding truth behind raised glasses and rehearsed grief. That night, Jane wandered back to the olive grove. The moon hung low, and the tree beneath which Daphne had died now seemed almost alive, its twisted branches reaching toward her as if in mourning. She sat on the bench and closed her eyes. There was something she was missing. The letters Daphne had mentioned. A visitor from the past. She rose, her mind racing. She needed to return to Daphne's room, search it more thoroughly. If Daphne had hidden letters, they might contain names. She entered the villa in silence, passing the empty drawing room, the now stilled gramophone, and the cold fireplace. She reached for Daphne's door and found it ajar. Her heart quickened. Someone else was inside. She pushed it open slowly. A figure stood by the writing desk, rifling through drawers. Tall, thin, moving with speed and precision. Before Jane could speak, the figure turned and fled past her, knocking her back against the doorframe. She chased, heart pounding, but the intruder vanished into the darkness of the east wing. When she returned to the room, the drawer was empty. The letters were gone. Someone else knew they existed, and someone was willing to kill to keep them hidden. Chapter 6. The Oracle's Clue. The following morning arrived with a blistering wind from the north, rustling the olive trees with a strange intensity. Jane stood on the terrace, gazing toward the horizon where the hills rolled into the sea. Her thoughts were not with the view, but with the figure from the night before. The intruder who had rifled through Daphne's desk and vanished like a phantom into the east wing. Whoever it was had taken the letters, but they had left behind something else. Hidden deep in the lower drawer, concealed beneath a false bottom, Jane had discovered a slim leather-bound notebook. Inside were only a few entries, written in Greek and then hastily translated in Daphne's own hand. The final entry had caught her eye, a Delian gold fragment marked with the symbol of the double snake, misplaced during the early foundations of the Temple of Apollo. Legend claims it was used to bribe the last oracle to falsify a prophecy during the Third Sacred War. If such a piece has been unearthed, its presence raises troubling implications. And yet, the symbol on our fragment matches exactly. And beneath it, scrawled hurriedly, "Need to return to the ruins. The inscription may confirm it. Cyril must not know." A map was tucked between the pages, an old excavation diagram of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, circled in red ink. Jane knew what her next step would be. She packed her satchel at once. The road to Delphi wound through craggy hills and sun-scorched valleys, the ruins perched like a secret folded into the mountainside. It was a 2-hour journey by motorcar, and Stavros drove in tense silence as the wind lashed at the edges of the road and dust spiraled into the air. Delphi had long been revered as the centre of the ancient world, the omphalos, or navel of the earth, and even now, with only fractured columns and broken stones remaining, there was an unshakable weight to the place, a sense of deep memory. Jane stepped from the car and walked into the sanctuary, past the broken treasuries and worn steps. The air grew cooler, shaded by tall cypress trees. Her shoes crunched against gravel as she descended the slope to the crumbling remains of the Temple of Apollo. She paused at the threshold. Only fragments remained of the temple's outer columns, but at its centre, part of the stone foundation was still intact, and carved into it, barely visible in the moss and dust, was the mark Daphne had described, 2 entwined serpents. She knelt, brushing it with her gloved fingers. The double snake motif had appeared in many forms across ancient Greek iconography, sometimes representing rebirth, sometimes deception. But in the context of the sacred war, it was said to signify betrayal. Her eyes drifted to the faded inscription above the mark. It was faint, but decipherable. "False words for golden gain, the voice of the gods bought with metal." So Daphne had been right. This wasn't merely about treasure, it was about a forgery of truth itself. The fragment had been part of a legendary scandal, a bribe to corrupt the Oracle of Delphi. And if someone had recreated this artifact, planted it in the soil, and passed it off as genuine, they were rewriting history, and someone else knew. A soft crunch behind her made her turn swiftly. Roland Blythe stood a few paces away, hat in hand, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "I followed you," he said, almost apologetically. "I thought I might find you here." Jane rose slowly. "Did you also follow Daphne here, before she died?" He hesitated. "Number. But I believe she came. She asked me once, casually, if I thought anyone would recognize a false artifact if it matched a known legend. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now I realize she was testing me." "Why were you so nervous yesterday, Roland?" He looked away. "Because I once brokered a deal involving forged antiquities. Years ago, I was nearly ruined. If Daphne exposed this one, if word got out I was involved, it would destroy me." "Were you involved?" "No." He met her eyes. "I wanted to be. Cyril promised me a cut if I helped stir interest in the find, but I never saw the actual piece. Daphne wouldn't let me near it." "Did you kill her?" "No." His voice was hoarse. "But I'm beginning to think someone in that house did, and they used her trust in history against her." As the sun reached its zenith, Jane returned to the villa, the stone serpent symbol seared into her memory. She needed to confront Lord Cyril. She found him in his study, polishing the owl head of his cane. "Miss Parsons," he said smoothly, "gone sightseeing?" "I followed in Daphne's footsteps," she said, "to the Temple of Apollo. She left notes about a forged artifact, a replica tied to a historical betrayal." Cyril's smile didn't falter, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "And you think I had something to do with it?" "I think you knew about it," Jane said, "and I think you needed it. Your reputation has faltered. Your funding's drying up. One major discovery could restore everything." "That's quite the accusation." "She discovered the truth," Jane said, "and she was silenced." For the first time, Lord Cyril's voice hardened. "You have no proof." "I have her notes," Jane replied, "and a witness who saw someone leave the house with the artifact the night before she died." A pause. Then he stood, slowly. "If you wish to remain at Delphi House," he said, "you will tread very carefully. Archaeology is built on fragments, Miss Parsons, and it is very easy to misinterpret what one sees." Jane met his gaze, unwavering. "Fortunately, I'm very good at interpretation." She left the room certain with the fact that Lord Cyril was hiding something. But was it murder? That evening, she returned to her room to find a note slipped under her door, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Meet me by the well, midnight. I know who did it." Her breath hitched. Someone was ready to talk, but would she reach them before the killer did? Chapter 7. The Olive Tree's Secret. The air was sharp and still at midnight, unusually quiet for a Grecian night. The cicadas had gone silent. A pale moon hung low over Delphi House, casting elongated shadows. Jane moved silently through the olive grove, her boots crunching lightly over dry leaves. She had dressed plainly in dark, her satchel slung over her shoulder, and in her coat pocket she carried her small pistol, more a precaution than an expectation. But tonight she trusted no one. She approached the old well. It sat behind a half-crumbled stone shed, its rope long dried and frayed. In daylight it seemed part of the scenery. Now, bathed in shadow, it felt like the stage for something ominous. She waited 5 minutes. 10. No one came. Then, a whisper, not words, the faint rustle of fabric. Jane turned toward the trees. "Who's there?" A figure stepped forward slowly. Theo Marchmont. His face pale, damp with sweat. He looked at her like a man walking the line between courage and collapse. "I wrote the note," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm here," she said evenly. "You said you knew who killed Daphne." "I do," he whispered. "But first, you need to understand why." They sat on the low wall beside the well, moonlight pooling around them. Theo lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "It started as a joke," he said. "A bluff, really. Uncle Cyril was obsessed with restoring his reputation. He kept talking about finding a legendary piece that would prove his theories about the Delphic priesthood being corrupted by warlords. He said it would reshape the narrative of classical truth, but he had nothing to show." "So you made something up?" Theo nodded. "I found an old sketch of the double snake motif in one of Daphne's books. I had a replica made by a local goldsmith in Athens. Just for fun, I said. Just to get Cyril excited. He bought it immediately, said it was real, said it was proof. He said we'd plant it, stage a discovery, and that he'd write a paper, name it the Marchmont fragment. He even promised me a cut." Jane's eyes narrowed. "But Daphne found out." "She recognized the craftsmanship," Theo muttered. "She knew it wasn't ancient. She confronted me. She said I was risking the integrity of the entire excavation." "So you told Cyril?" "Yes," he whispered. And that's when it all changed. He didn't want to stop. He wanted to control the narrative. He said Daphne was a threat to everything. "Did he kill her?" Theo shook his head. "Number, I did." Silence fell like a stone into the well. Jane sat motionless, her heart slowing, thoughts reeling. Theo looked up at her, his eyes wild and glistening. "I didn't mean to, not at first. I went to her room to take back the fragment. I thought she'd be asleep, but she was waiting for me. She had a vial in her hand. A poison, she said, She threatened to expose everything, to ruin us both. I panicked. He pulled a small velvet pouch from his coat. Inside was the golden statuette fragment, the fake. She turned to leave, he continued, and I grabbed the vial from her. It broke in my hand. The smell was awful. She inhaled it, then collapsed. I didn't even mean for it to happen. I didn't mean to. Jane stood slowly. So you fled, left her by the tree? He nodded, barely able to speak. I panicked. I hid the fragment. I told Roland I'd seen her walking toward the grove alone. And then I just waited for someone else to find her. Jane looked down at the broken man before her. But someone else knew, she said. Someone ransacked her room after her death, took the letters. Theo swallowed hard. That was Cyril. Jane narrowed her eyes. He knew it wasn't me who planned all this, Theo whispered. Not really. It was his idea to pass off the forgery, his ambition. He told me to clean it up, told me to destroy her letters. He knew if word got out, the scandal would destroy not just him, but British claims to the excavation altogether. So he let you take the fall? Theo nodded. I think he hoped I would confess eventually, that if it came to it, I'd take the blame. For him, for family. Jane was silent a long time. Then she held out her hand. Give me the fragment. He did. It felt warm from his coat, strangely heavy. Now, she said quietly, you'll come with me. By dawn, Theo Marchmont was in police custody, and Jane stood in the drawing-room of Delphi House with the remaining guests, Lord Cyril, Roland and Eleni, all seated under the pale light of a clouded morning. I suppose you'll enjoy this, Lord Cyril said coldly, the great unmasking. I take no pleasure in this, Jane said. A young woman is dead, a promising scholar, your own protégé. She turned toward Eleni. You kept silent, even when you suspected the artifact was false. Why? I suspected, Eleni said bitterly, but I had no proof and no authority. The British own every story here, even the lies. Roland stepped forward, wiping his glasses. I knew something was wrong when Daphne stopped cataloguing. She was meticulous, but I thought she was just growing paranoid. Paranoia, Jane said softly, is only madness until it's proven true. She looked at Cyril last. You may not have killed Daphne, she said, but her death was written in your hand the day you chose forgery over truth. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, with the faintest smirk, he rose from his chair and walked away, out onto the veranda. That afternoon, Jane stood again beneath the olive tree. Captain Lucas had left with Theo in custody. The artifact would be examined, and scandal would surely follow. The newspapers would call it a disgrace. Some would call it a tragedy. Jane would call it a warning. She touched the bark of the tree where Daphne had leaned in death. The truth, like the roots of the olive, always pushed upward, eventually. And lies, no matter how carefully buried, never remained hidden forever. With her bag packed and hat in hand, Jane turned toward the sea. Her next case, whatever it might be, would not come with golden lies. But she would be ready for it. She always was.